Good morning. Today's devotion comes out of Exodus chapter 3 and 4. Moses sees a burning bush in the wilderness. And the interesting thing is this bush is burning and yet not being consumed. God supernaturally is burning using this bush, but it's not being burnt out. And as Moses would come in to take a closer look, there the Lord would introduce himself and speak to him and reveal that Moses was being called to go before Pharaoh and tell him to let God's people go. Let the Hebrew people return to the land of Canaan. Well, Moses was a little discouraged. At first he says, well, who should I say even sent me? And God would give him his name. Tell them, I am that I am sent you. Or we pronounce it Yahweh or Jehovah. Still apprehensive, Moses says, well, what if they don't believe me? And the Lord says, well, what's in your hand? And Moses was holding a staff, and so Moses says, a staff. He goes, throw it down. So Moses threw it down, and immediately the staff turned into a serpent. Now, God would say, pick it up by the tail. And so as Moses picked it up by the tail, the serpent immediately turned back into a staff. Then God said, put your hand in your bosom, or that front part of your robe or coat. And so Moses would tuck his hand inside, and God said, now pull it out again. As Moses pulled it out, it was diseased. It was leprous. It was disgustingly white. And God said, now put it back in. So Moses tucked his hand back into his bosom, back closest to his heart, and God told him to pull it out, and as he did, it was normal again. Well, this is where our devotion picks up. It's in Exodus chapter 4, verse 8. And God says, then let it be, if they do not believe you, nor heed the message of the first sign, that they may believe the message of the latter sign. We know the story. 10 plagues God gave to Egypt, or God sent against Egypt to demonstrate his power, his authority, that they would know that there is a God in heaven, and that they were going to be releasing the Hebrew people. We saw Moses throw down his staff before Pharaoh and it turned into a snake. We saw that snake gobble up the other snakes that the magicians tried to conjure up. But we never saw the leprosy. Not until desert days, in the wilderness. There in Numbers chapter 12, we see that Miriam and Aaron, discouraged and upset with some of Moses' decision, spoke out against him. And they said, has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also? Now, poor Moses. Before Pharaoh, Moses was receiving the wrath of Pharaoh. Pharaoh couldn't stand him. As Pharaoh was upset with Moses, he mistreated the Hebrew people. The Hebrew people didn't like Moses. And so Moses was stuck serving in ministry with Pharaoh not liking him and the people he's ministering to not liking him. Does that sound familiar maybe in your life? See, Moses can go to God and receive power and strength and comfort, but sometimes he would go to his brother and sister and receive comfort from them. They were behind him. They were closest to his heart, if you would. But the whole sign of the leprosy, as he put his hand in, is sometimes those closest to you might have diseased words, or words that would eat at you, discourage you, burn you out. Jesus would say, a prophet is not without dishonor, except in his own land, amongst his own people in his own house. Guys, God's called you into leadership. God's called you into a ministry bigger than you. Don't be discouraged. Remember that like that staff, you are a tool in God's hand, and he wants to use you. Another time this happens, we see Jesus talking to Peter at the last chapter of John. Jesus already been crucified, already been resurrected, and there at the beachside breakfast talking to Peter, 3 times he says, Peter, do you love me? And Peter says, you know I love you. Then feed my sheep. Peter, do you love me? You know I love you. Then tend to my lambs. Then the 3rd time Jesus says, Peter, do you love me? Peter says, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. And then Jesus, feed my sheep. You see, Peter too was being called to a ministry greater than himself. He needed to remember that he was a tool in the master's hand. But Jesus took it a step farther and revealed his future and said, Peter, when you're old, they will take you to places that you don't want to go. Speaking of future persecution and ultimately his death. At that point, Peter said, what about him? And he points to John. John, the disciple, a close friend of Peter. What about him? And Jesus says, Peter, that doesn't concern you. What is that to you? You follow me. Gang, don't be discouraged when those around you, those closest to you, sometimes say things that are discouraging. Say things that might tear you down. Use diseased words. Yes, they're close to your heart, but remember that you are a tool in the master's hand. And remember where you first met God, where Moses first met God, at a burning bush, being used, but not being consumed. God desires to manifest his power in your life. Be faithful. He's faithful. Great is your reward. Hang in there, gang. God bless you.